Sangela, 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 Yoruba, Sangela, 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 Yoruba. Yeah, this song was done by our own Mark Holder years ago, and it still has its significance even now. Only hope it's fabulous.
Here's the drink that will flush sugar from veins and make poor circulation disappear without needing so many pills.
Pay attention. Blood glucose.
In life, there's an easy game. Don't be broken hearted, for there's gonna be a change. Please keep your courage. Don't think about the hard times. Take a good look at the good times, and I'm sure you will find your heartache drifting behind. When there's a will, there's got to be a way. Everybody, when there's a will, there's a way. In life, there must be problems, suffering and confusion, but giving up wouldn't solve them. We gotta find a solution, but don't think about the hard times. Take a good look at the good times, and I'm sure you will find your heartache drifting behind. There's a will, there's got to be a way. Sing it, children. There's a will, there's a way. I recently covered this song. But don't think about the hard times. Take a good look at the good times, and I'm sure you will find your heartache drifting behind. There's a will, there's got to be a way. Everybody, there's a will, there's a way. Sing it to you. There's a will, there's got to be a way. Sing children, there's a will, there's a way.
Where there's a will, there's got to be a way. Mark Holder's special, sung there by our own Yoruba singers. Yoruba singers. It was nice to wake up this morning and to open the newspapers and to see that the University of Guyana will confer an honorary doctorate to 11 outstanding Guyanese, among them Ezzy Rockcliffe of the Yoruba singers. Well deserved, long overdue, an honorary doctorate to Ezzy Rockcliffe for his contributions to culture and music. And it's good to see in that group, Anti-Comsi. Those of you who are old timers and are as old as people like me will remember Anti-Comsi on the radio. And she also would be conferred with honorary doctor. But we want to celebrate all those who are going to be conferred with honorary doctorates, especially Ezzy Rockcliffe, poor boy, leading the oldest string band in Guyana, the Yoruba Singers. I think it's been 54 years, when that band was formed. It was part of Askria. The band came into being. The idea was planted, as he himself testified, by Eyusi Kwayana. The idea of the band was planted, and he took up the challenge. And the Yoruba Singers is still with us today, as he's with us. Congratulations to Ezzy Rockcliffe on that honorary doctorate for his contributions to culture. Good evening to you, and welcome to Politics 101 on a Monday night. Tonight we are going to be talking with Brother Tacuma Ogunseye and the Brother Kidackie Amsterdam. We are going to be examining and talking about some issues. So please share the link and just let everyone know that we are on. It's a Monday night. I would like to welcome all of you who are joining us. All of you who are joining us would like to welcome you to Politics 101 tonight on a Monday night. Politics 101. UG confirms honorary doctorates on Chris Fernandez, Vickinson Ali, Ezzy Rockcliffe, Pat Dial, and others. Good to see our university stepping up and not just giving doctorates to politicians, honorary doctorates, but to regular folk who have contributed to our nation, our Guyana, our Caribbean. This morning, the WPL, the press conference, and we dealt with a number of issues, and we are going to be talking about some of those issues with WPA members, WPA executive members, Tacuma Ogunseye and Kidackie Amsterdam of Guyanese Morning Time on Cams TV. You can catch Kidackie there every morning, early to rise, first to break the day. Please share the link and let everyone know that we're here and we're ready to roll this evening. We're ready to roll this evening. Oh my, Quincy Jones. Lots of you would know of Quincy Jones. Quincy Jones, the famous American musical icon, Quincy Jones. He passed away at the age of 91. What an era of great music. The great Quincy Jones, dead at 91. May his soul rest in peace as he returns to the ancestors. Death certainly will not find him thinking that he dies. Quincy Jones, rest in peace. Walk good, my brother. You've made your mark on the landscape of humanity. You've made your mark on the landscape of humanity, and you've left a lot for us to take with us and to make this world a better place. The Bible says 70. You've gone way beyond that. 70, and then some. Brother Quincy Jones, dead at 91. Please share the link, please share the link, please share the link, please share the link, and let everyone know that we are on. Politics 101 is on. Politics 101 is
this press conference of the Working People's Alliance, WP. It is now 11 o'clock, and at the head table we have Doctors David Hinds, Professor David Hinds, presidential candidate of the Working People's Alliance. We have Dr. Dennis Canterbury, executive member of the Working People's Alliance, and Brother Takuma Ogunseye, executive member and co-leader of the Working People's Alliance. Welcome to this press conference, and we'll start with Professor David Hinds reading the party's press statement.
Good morning, members of the media. Thank you, Brother Kidackie. The Working People's Alliance wholeheartedly supports the recommendation by Elder Egislate that the government's recent $100,000 cash grant to each voter be taken to the National Assembly for full debate and passage into law. Indeed, the WPA's cash transfer proposal, in the form of the Buxton proposal, calls for such payments to be sanctioned by legislation. Like Elder Kwayano, we feel that a policy of this magnitude should not be left to the whims and fancies of the executive branch. Second, given the range of opinion on this policy, the proper democratic approach is subjected to the widest debate and scrutiny by the elected representatives of the people. Further, Guyana's constitution gives ultimate control of the national purse strings to the legislative branch. Article 217, Section 4 of Guyana's constitution clearly states, and I quote, "No monies shall be withdrawn from any public fund other than the consolidated fund unless the issue of those monies has been authorized by or under an act of parliament." End of quote. It is WPA's considered view that since the cash grant in question was not part of the 2024 budget, it is a violation of the Constitution to proceed with its implementation without legislative approval. The executive is not the legislative branch of government. As Elder Kwayana observes, and I quote, "For some of my generation, not brainwashed by the British, but growing up in the tradition that Parliament is the controller of the public purse. Ultimately, this is an amazing development, not a piece of legislation. How will the Auditor General pronounce this distribution when it takes place?" End of quote. WPA therefore condemns, in the strongest terms, the government's decision to proceed with implementing the grant without legislative cover. We view the decision as articulated by Vice President Jack Hill at his most recent press conference as yet another brazen autocratic act, a form of governance that has been normalized by this government. It is a grave manifestation of executive lawlessness and tyranny that has no place in a democratic order. His explanation that legislation would impose rigid, recurrent expenditures on the executive is at best nonsensical. It exposes the Vice President's unfamiliarity with how the law works, in particular, the relationship between the law and the economy. Further, it ominously betrays a worrying disrespect for the rule of law, something that should be resisted by all Guyanese. WPA reiterates its belief that all cash grants or transfers must be grounded in legislation. This is part of a long tradition of democratic practice that is even more needed in this new oil and gas dispensation. In fact, we believe that any new legislation should also give retroactive cover to previous cash grants. WPA takes this opportunity to register its abhorrence of Vice President Jack Dio's continued use of his constitutional office to hurl insults at the government's critics, including women, and at media operatives. In this instance, we note with much consternation his recent attacks on the integrity of Elder Kwayana and Professor Clive Thomas. Instead of addressing the issues raised by these two eminent Guyanese citizens, the Vice President resorted to slandering them and misrepresenting their views. His characterization of Kwayana as being part of a WPA racial cabal is a nasty attack on someone who has dedicated his long political life to fighting against injustice, including racial and ethnic injustice. Mr. Jack Dio, on the other hand, has spent his political career presided over institutional racism, in particular, political racial assassinations and racially driven discrimination against African Guyanese workers and citizens. WPA serves notice to the Vice President that his attacks on our leaders will not go unanswered. Jack Dio's misrepresentations and downright lies about Professor Clive Thomas represents a new low in political discourse. For example, his declaration that Thomas presided over the closure of Gaisuko sugar estates and the consequent firing of thousands of sugar workers is a figment of his demented imagination. For the record, Professor Thomas, in concert with the Commission of Inquiry on the sugar sector, into the sugar sector, recommended that no estates should be closed. Jagdeo, also in an effort to misrepresent the Buxton proposal, falsely and maliciously claims that Thomas wants to give $1 million to every Guyanese citizen. Anyone who has been following the issue knows that the Buxton proposal proposes that sum of money, or the equivalent of 10% of the annual oil revenues, be given to each household. Free and fair elections. From the time of its birth in 1974, WP has been an ardent proponent of free and fair elections as central to Guyana's political architecture and political culture. We regret that after almost 6 decades of independence, we still have not been able to construct a national electoral machinery that is acceptable to all stakeholders. The 2020 elections demonstrated how fragile that machinery is, a fact that was acknowledged by many of the foreign observers. Unfortunately, the PPP has resisted all attempts to correct the situation. The party's resistance to cleaning the voters list and introducing biometrics in an effort to reduce the potential for voter fraud is tantamount to holding the country at ransom. The constant excuses run counter to the ruling party's rhetoric in favor of free and fair elections. WPA warns that if this issue is not resolved, the coming election could well be a trigger for political instability. We do not see how there can be much confidence in an election with a voters list that is equal to the size of the population. Nothing short of a new list bereft of the bloat will suffice. Further, given the documented instances of voter impersonation unearthed by the 2020 recount and confirmed by immigration authorities, the use of enhanced biometrics is urgently needed. WPA therefore supports the stance of the 3 opposition-appointed GCOM commissioners in relation to the above stated issues. We call for a brand new voters list that results from fresh house-to-house registration. Given the ruling of the courts in relation to the removal of citizens from the current list, the parties must pass legislation to facilitate this exercise. We also support the introduction of biometrics. The Attorney General's recent excuse that power failure could interfere with the technology is nothing short of scandalous. In any case, WPA is informed that the technology is insulated against power failures. WPA also registers its concern over the repeated instances of GCOM chair voting with the government-appointed commissioners to thwart solutions to these problems. This flies in the face of the principle of an independent chair. WPA finds this development unacceptable and calls on the Madam Chair to adopt the Surajbali formula of consensus decision-making with the use of the casting vote as an absolute last resort. Failure to move in this direction, WPA would have to join the calls for our resignation. WPA is concerned about the charges of politicization of GCOM staff. This is a crucial area of the electoral machinery The charges of hiring staff who are considered favorable to one party or the other must not be taken lightly. In this regard, WPA calls for an independent audit of the existing staff to determine their neutrality in the conduct of their official responsibilities. We also support Commissioner Vincent Alexander's recommendation that future hiring process be conducted by an independent committee rather than the GCOM commissioners. Finally, WPA calls on the international observer groups and the wider international community to exert pressure on the government to change course. While we frown on interference in the internal affairs of our country, we recognize that Guyana is part of a larger global community, and its governors should be held accountable to universal governance standards. Referendum on the 2016 PSA. WPA notes recent calls for a referendum on the 2016 oil contract. While we do not oppose such a move, we strongly feel that such a referendum must also cover the distribution of the oil resources to the people and the form of governance to be adopted as we transition into a petro state. It is our view that the three issues are interrelated. We cannot separate the government's contract with oil companies from its social political contract with the We seem to have encountered some difficulty there. Okay, here we go. We seem to there seemed to be some difficulty there, so we'll stop the statement there. Good evening again, and welcome to all of you to today's edition of Politics 101. You were listening there to an excerpt from the WPS press conference this morning, covering a range of issues, including the situation at GCOM as it regards free and fair elections, the taking of the cash grants proposal to the National Assembly for legislation, and we also covered the issue of a proposed referendum on the 2016 oil contract. And finally, we touched on the issue of Ogunseye, Lancaster village, where the government is running a canal through that village near to where people live without consultation with the people of the community. Tonight we have here on the show Kidackie, Amsterdam, and Tacuma Ogunseye. Both of them are executive members of the WPA. Tacuma is a co-leader of the party, and Kidackie, organizing secretary of the party. Gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Politics 101.
Hi, good evening, Doctor.
Good evening, George.
Kidackie, let me start with you because we didn't get that part of the press statement in. The situation there at Ogunseye, Lancaster, and the Quarantine Coast, where the government once again is moving to install infrastructure in a community against the wishes of the people. Last week, you went up there along with Member of Parliament Coretta McDonald and spoke to the people and heard from the people of that community. Tell our audience what's happening there.
Good evening again. What's happening is what? The usual high-handed approach to quote-unquote development by the government. In this instance, the government behaves as though development is not for the people. Development is for those who sit in their air-conditioned offices in Georgetown, because only they make the decisions. What has happened, from my understanding, I was called by the chairperson of the Ogunseye Lancaster NDC, because I'd say we have a working relationship. Viewers will remember me going there sometime previously to highlight the dilapidated state of the Neighborhood Democratic Council offices. I want to report that the offices are just the same. There has been no improvement to it. The government has promised, I think it was budgeted for, the construction of a new building to accommodate the NDC. I understand that building, that work has perhaps gone out to tender, but nothing has really changed. Good. In the meantime, development is taking place in other communities around Ogunseye, Lancaster. Wind, for example, concrete drains and so on and so forth. I know that's not what you asked me, but the thing is, we need a background to establish a relationship between, or lack thereof, Ogunseye, Lancaster, and the NEC residents and the government. So I was told that the Minister of Agriculture had a meeting somewhere in the area a few months ago and indicated that the government is going to be doing a Hope-style canal in the local there. Now, when we say the Hope-style canal, I don't know, many of you might know the Hope Canal just on the East Coast there, which was constructed under, I think, the ministerial responsibility of Robert Posada at that time. It was intended to ease the flooding in the area on the East Coast at that time. And so apparently they want to replicate that in Berbice, Ogunseye, Lancaster, more specifically Liverpool. The canal is supposed to pass through Liverpool. So he had the meeting and he indicated to residents that this is our intention. My understanding is that they told him that they do not believe it is the most suitable place for a canal because it is going to be passing through their community, which is a well, I would say, built up community in terms of residents and so on, children. And so it is going to present a risk to the lives of children especially, and inconvenience of dislocation of residents. However, in the interest of development, they apparently agree. Well, listen, if you need to do this, despite the fact that we don't believe it's the best thing to do it here, if you're insistent that you will do it here and you need to do it, there's already an existing canal or trench. And east of that trench, there is a lot of government reserve. So you can widen the trench and utilize some of the government reserve to bring it to the width that you want to. And that was that. They subsequently saw survey take place, which appeared to be keeping with, quote unquote, the blessing that they gave to the project. But recently, proprietors went to the backlands and found, according to them, 8 excavators destroying their lands, destroying the permanent crops on their lands, which is for the east of the government reserve. The total amount of land, I understand, is between 700 and 800 acres of land. Private proprietorship, I'm told, land that was being used for cultivation of both cash crop or short-term crop, long-term crop, including rice. And When they investigated, they were told that that's the government's plan being executed there for the construction of this canal, and they came upon new surveying marks. The surveying parlors, we call them, the parlors were placed way past where the original ones were. As a matter of fact, the parlors were now on private property. And all of those permanent crops and so on and those private properties were destroyed. The concern is that they raise the concern with the government, whoever the representative was, and they were told you will be compensated for your land. But the residents' concerns are that no amount of compensation for the land could put them back at a place of, I would say, economic empowerment that they were at. Because with the lands destroyed, they will not be able to farm. They will not be able to occupy the lands as they previously did. And so we're talking about an immediate generation of hundreds, perhaps thousands of persons being affected. And of course, in the long term, future generations not having any access to lands that were previously owned by the proprietors of Liverpool. And by extension, I want to say Ogunseye, Manchester. So that's the gist of the problem. That is the gist of the problem. What we see there is the government's high-handedness in terms of dealing especially with African Guyanese land proprietors. We saw what took place at Mocha. We saw what took place at Peters Hall. We are seeing what is taking place with land co-ops around the country. And every time it appears as though African Guyanese have control, ownership, occupancy of large spots of land, the government moves in indiscriminately, unilaterally, commandeer it from them with the offer of compensation. If you remember in the Peters Hall matter, the courts did rule that you can't take away people's property and then promise compensation. Compensation has to be given before occupancy, let's say, of the property. That certainly is not happening at Liverpool.
Brother Kidackie, Amsterdam here, reporting on some new developments on the quarantine course at the Lancaster, Oxtyle, Liverpool, Manchester area, where the government is digging a new canal against the wishes of the residents of that community. There was no prior in-depth discussion with the residents. There was not a mutual agreement on how they will proceed. And the residents are up in arms because they've lost crops, they've lost lands, they have not been compensated. But you hear from Kidackie here that compensation is just part of the problem. The thing is that if you take people's land like that, you are taking away their livelihood. We in the Working People's Alliance have always said we do not advise people to stand in the way of infrastructural development, but that infrastructural development must not interfere with the livelihood and the safety of the people. I looked at some of the videos, and it seems as though this canal is going to pass through an area that is considered residential, meaning a lot of people live there, lots of children, and the villagers are concerned for the safety of especially their children. Kidackie?
Yeah, I just Googled the size of the Hope Canal, and I'm seeing that the top width of the Hope Canal is 132 feet. So imagine the width of the canal we're talking about, and the what should I say, volume of water that is going to be in that area. Given the fact that it is a well built up area in terms of residents, should the banks of that canal break, then there's going to be serious destruction or further destruction of people's properties and their livelihood. the trajectory of the canal, based on what I recognize, is going to cause people to have to remove their homes from where they currently situated, businesses from where they currently situated, and the current community center known as the Landliveman, which is Lanchester, Liverpool, Land, Land Manchester, Liverpool, Lancaster, yes. Right, Landliveman Community Center. It's in the direct part of this canal. The other thing is to note is that the canal is not going to travel a straight line if it is constructed where they are attempting to construct it right now. It will go to a certain distance, and then it has to make a diversion, one or two diversions before heading back to the Ogfall, which I understand is located somewhere around Wim. Whereas the residents are saying that if the canal were to be constructed at Wim, where there's a clear path to the outfall, the kind of destruction and dislocation that we're talking about taking place in Liverpool will not happen. If it were to be constructed at another area they call John's, you're not going to have that kind of problem. But the difference of those two areas to Liverpool is that they're predominantly occupied by Indo-Guyanese. And so the people are also claiming, are saying this is just in keeping with the PPP's racist policy to disempower African Guyanese when it comes to land ownership.
Environmental racism, we just saw the issue there on the East Bank at Covenant, where they are building a dump site there, and the residents are there up in arms. Once again, we are seeing this government moving in a high-handed way. The people of the villages there have vowed that they are not going to let this matter go. There have been calls from villagers for protest action. We will continue to keep an eye on what is going on there. Brother Tacuma Ogunseye, let me bring you in here. AUC Kwayana, Elder UC Kwayana, wrote a letter last week to the newspapers calling for legislation of the proposed cash transfer, cash grant by the government. When asked if the government would go in that direction, Vice President Jack Dio went into a tirade, essentially calling Kwayana a racist, saying that Clive Thomas wants to give all the money from oil to the Guyanese people, to each individual. And when pressed on whether they are going to take the matter to the legislative body, the vice president said no, that you cannot legislate recurring expenditure, and so that the government is proceeding without legislative cover. The WPA is arguing at the press conference this morning that it's a violation of the Constitution, because in effect what the government is doing is that large sums of money, $60 billion and more, it is spending without approval from the branch of government that is responsible for spending money. Expand on that, please.
Firstly, I want to say that Jack Dio's attack on a UC is a reflection of the level of degeneration in the political culture of the country. And a lot of this degeneration has been driven, by the behavior of the PPP. That you can't have a civil discourse on important national issues without it being degenerated into loose talk reckless talks, and outright lie and malicious behavior. Now, I want to remind, because I did made this observation before many years ago. I remember when Jagdeo first came on the political scene, and he was being appointed leader and president. He won the elections and he was president. There was debate in the WPA executive on, the prospect of Jagdeo's candidacy. And I remember I was very concerned, and I took the position that Jagdeo was too young and unfamiliar with the great challenges facing the country, and he's hardly likely to end up to be a very effective and useful president for the country. And I remember UC took in the opposite position. UC position in a nutshell was that we must give the young man a chance. He's a young man, and that we should, support him and give him a chance to prove himself. I make this point to demonstrate the difference in political culture. That Kwayana was very open to Jagdeo's ascendancy in the politics of the country, and was prepared to give him a chance to prove himself. He didn't come to any judgment and conclusions as to what Jagdeo presidency would deliver to the country. And when you compare this with Jagdeo's behavior, his recent behavior of accusing a UC of being a racist, and he's speaking from the position of government, it demonstrates that the Jagdeo's political culture and the PPP's political culture has so degenerated that it's like a reflex action now, that they could do nothing other than promoting negative behavior once you challenge them. And I think that he saw a UC's insistence that, in keeping with the democratic culture of the country, that Parliament is a place to approve the spending of that kind of money. And that, in keeping with the traditions of the country, you have to go to Parliament to get parliamentary approval, for that kind of spending. And Jagdeo, who sees himself as a political dictator and who behaves like though the oil money and the whole country belongs to Jagdeo and the PPP, he saw it as an affront to him and his party that Kwayana could call for a legal framework which is consistent with the Constitution to address the matter. And I think that is basically what he can't stand. He can't stand insistent on control, even if those controls are reflected in the Constitution, when he is demonstrating and exercising power in the equation.
Brother Tacuma Ogunseye there, and I'm reminded here in the comment section that I took off my gloves on Friday and went to battle with Jagdeo. And I, as you, brother Ogun, know, that at our executive, we took the position that we weren't going to go after him. But he kept week after week personal abuse of Professor Thomas and Kwayana. And I had enough of it on Friday, and I let him have it. And I am giving him personal notice, and the WPA is giving him personal notice that if he continues with that kind of behavior, we are going to meet him in kind. And I trust you, Mr. Jagdeo. You ain't meet your match yet. There is much more to come. Desist from that kind of behavior. Kidackie, Amsterdam.
Before you bring in
Yes, go ahead,
Kidackie,
brother.
I want to say publicly, I support your dealing with Jagdeo on that particular program. I think he deserves it. You see, sometimes we have to reach, and meet challenges, in a certain way. And if Jagdeo believe that he have some monopoly on obnoxious behavior, he should be made to know that we could also degenerate, okay, and to reach him, at that level. Of course, it is not our preferred political method, but I think in the circumstances, it was necessary and it was well done, and it has my full support and the support of the WPA.
Kidackie? Kidackie, are you with us there? You might have muted yourself.
Yes, on what? Kidackie, on what?
The issue that we are discussing.
Jagdeo is talking about the UC Koyana?
Yes, and our response to it.
Well, certainly, I certainly approve of your response. As the viewers say, I approve of you taking off your gloves on Jagdeo. I've always said Jagdeo is like a school bully, schoolyard bully. He always would attack you or attack, quote unquote, those who we perceive as weak and not willing to return the favor. And for as long as you take Michelle Obama's advice and go high when Jagdeo goes low, he's going to continue to go low. And so at some point in time, somebody had to respond to him in kind. And I'm happy that you, despite the decision taken at the executive committee of the Working People's Alliance, basically dealt with Jagdeo condemningly. In terms of lies and misrepresentation and propagandizing on all of the issues which were raised, both by Body UC Koyana and Professor Clive Thomas, no surprises there, because that is what the PPP and Jagdeo is about: misrepresentation. Professor Thomas wants to give every citizen $1 million. It makes it make Professor Thomas look like a buffoon, because enough oil is not being produced. Enough oil will not be produced to pay out that kind of money. And so Jagdeo wants to control the narrative for people to walk around and say, but them WPA people saying give everybody money, the money is not enough. And the thing, like Amanda said, a lot of the people who listen to Jagdeo and follow the PPP are intellectually lazy. So it is not that he doesn't know that what he is putting out there is inaccurate and dishonest. He knows, but he also knows who listens to him, and the fact that they will listen to him and they will take it as the gospel truth. And so I believe that we have that responsibility. Every citizen, as a matter of fact, not only us in the WPA, have that responsibility to set the record straight and fact check Jagdeo every time he opens his mouth.
And of course, none of our citizens, including supporters of our side of the aisle and supporters of the PPP side of the aisle, are naturally intellectually lazy. Working people are intellectually agile, but the PPP is socializing its supporters to become intellectually lazy. And we are intervening to prevent that intellectual laziness, because we think the PPP supporters, PNC supporters, WPA supporters, the supporters of all parties have the kind of intellectual acumen to recognize wrong from right. But the danger of Jagdeo is the way in which he insists on ensuring that people who follow him act in an intellectually lazy way. But we know differently, and we shall continue to work even on those people to stand in between Jagdeo and them, and for them to maintain their intellectual integrity. Takuma Ogunseye, the issue of GCOM free and fair elections. Recently, the commissioners appointed by the opposition made the point that all is not well at GCOM, that there is resistance there against biometrics, resistance to cleaning the voters list, and none other than the Attorney General recently said that they will not go for biometrics because the machines could break down and cause problems, and that
They could be blacked out.
used before. Your thoughts, the WPA thoughts on that?
Firstly, I want to commend our commissioners, Vincent Alexander, Charles Corbin, and Desmond Trotman, for their steadfastness in trying to keep the country, the region, and the world up to date with the challenges that they are experiencing in GCOM, which is designed to undermine the basis for a fair and free elections. And I want to just to make it clear that this recent statement is directed not to the opposition parties, because these comrades have been keeping the opposition parties up to date with all the developments in GCOM, and a lot of the problems have a long history and predates the present. And they were very disappointed that the opposition collectively didn't seem to be able to find some effective response to help them in the struggle to contain the PPP's march of domination in GCOM. So this statement was directed not to the political opposition, because they were well aware of these developments, but to the country, the region, and the world. And I think it is a significant development. GCOM and elections in this country are extremely important matters, and we are at the juncture in the country's history, given our long experience with elections and electoral problems, from rigged elections, the accusation of rigged elections, and in the context of oil, and in the context of a constitutional governance system which is based upon winner take all. Our politics, as it is a kind of zero-sum politics. It have little space for reasonableness. And when it comes to the elections, which is critical in determining who will run the country and how the country will run, and by extension, how the resources of the country will be managed, and how the developmental framework of the country will go, we are dealing with serious matters. And in the context of oil and the kind of monies that we're talking about, we are at a point in our history where this is not the ordinary engagement of the 70s, the 60s, the 80s, the 90s. This is a new engagement. And as the WPA have said in its statement today, that if what is happening at GCOM continues, it will undermine an already bad situation where people have little confidence in GCOM. And if we go to the elections with all of those problems, we could almost guarantee it will lead to political instability. And neither the losing side would not accept the results. So this is what is facing us. So what happened at GCOM is critical to giving the country a chance. Given the winner-take-all electoral system, which in itself is problematic, but when you add rigged elections to that, or you add an electoral process where the losers can accept the results given the nature, of the process, at this historical point in time, we're walking in uncharted waters, and we're setting up a very dangerous situation for the country.
Kidackie, let me bring you in here. We have noticed since the 2020 elections, the chairman of GCOM has consistently voted with the government commissioners, to the point where people are saying, really what you have is a 4-3 commission with 4 for the PPP and 3 for the opposition. The Constitution makes requirements for an independent chair of the commission. Your party said in the statement, our party said in the statement this morning, that we would prefer the chair to act in an independent manner. Dr. Steve Shrewsbury, who was the chair before Madam Chair, he would always say that when it was time to make a decision, he did not use his casting vote. What he did was try to get the two sides to come to a consensus on the matter so that he would not have to use his casting vote. He called me one day and told me in his long reign, he only used the casting vote once or twice. How dangerous is this situation with the chairman continuously voting with one side in a political commission?
It is extremely dangerous. It doesn't speak of a democratic institution. It doesn't speak of an institution that is unbiased. It doesn't speak of a chairman that is unbiased. And if one were to accept elections in this country, elections that are closely contested usually, as being free, fair, and credible, then one would certainly expect that the chairman at least is unbiased and will not be partisan and support the positions of only one group of people at the commission. The way Claudette Singh behaves is as if the opposition representatives at the commission there, the opposition commissioners, have no brain. They can never be right. They can never be right, regardless of what is proposed, regardless of what is discussed. The results are always returned as the chairman voting with the PPP commissioners. It stinks to the high heavens, to say the least. And for me, while I was out there protesting, is one thing I used to say. Claudette Singh, show some semblance of respect for yourself. Go home. Go home, go home, go home. I think the time has come. The time has long passed for Claudette Singh to resign, retire, whatever the appropriate action, but remove herself from GCOM and give the institution, the organization, a breath of fresh air, a possibility of breathing new life into it with somebody who can be as impartial as is necessary for the job. The many who argue that the PPP caught her in a bind, she has been compromised, etc., I don't know. But her actions certainly are not actions of somebody who can claim that they have integrity and somebody who can claim that they're exercising free will. Something is afoot that is causing Claudette Singh to always vote on the side of the PPP.
The Working People's Alliance allows for the chairman to prove that she is not a biased chairperson. And we propose, as I said earlier, we propose that she adopts the Shrewsbury model, where she ceases to use the casting vote unless it is absolutely necessary. We shall see what she does before we pass final judgment. Brother Tacuma, this morning at the press conference, the issue of a referendum on whether the 2016 oil contract that was signed by the coalition government whether it should be renegotiated. The proposal is to have a referendum to ask the people whether that contract should be renegotiated. What is the WPA position on that?
Well, the WPA position is, as you explained in the press conference, that we are not opposed if there's a general consensus in the country that we need to go to a referendum and put that issue to the country and allow the people to express an opinion on it. We will not stand in the way of that because we will see it as a democratic expression, okay, of the right of the people to participate in these important decisions. But we didn't stop there. We said that if you're going to go for a referendum, rather than just to go for that single issue, we felt that you should tie other issues to the referendum. And we argue that apart from the issue of whether the 2016 production sharing agreement should be renegotiated, that we want to put on the ballot the question of the cash transfer, the Buxom proposal, okay, which we felt and we continue to argue is the most effective and most mature and scientifically examined proposal that would satisfy the objective, which we believe cash transfer ought to be directed to. That is the question of poverty, and to setting the basis for universal income for all Guyanese. So we will want that issue to be put on the ballot. We also said that there is another issue that is very important to us. This is the question of sheer governance, the ending the winner-take-all political system, which we believe is important for the future of the country. And for us, the present electoral engagement is extremely important because this engagement could set the stage for enhancing the march of the country to a shared governance solution. And as we made it clear, you made it extremely clear that for us, participating in the upcoming elections is not an end in itself. We want to use an election victory to open the door for national reconciliation and a national government which could preserve and protect the national patronage of the country and to make the country more able to defend itself against the hostile international environment which is and will continue to develop around us. Too often our politics have been too short-term and guided by the partisan two-party contestation or 3 parties or 4 parties contestation, and we lost track, okay, of more fundamental things. We are facing with a border challenge. We are facing with migrants coming into the country. We are facing with people with design, for our oil and our other resources. And we are not preparing the country and the younger generation to stand up to these challenges. And we at the WPA, while we are very concerned about immediacy of the political engagement and the removal of the government in the upcoming elections, we don't see removal of the government, okay, as a solution to the profound challenges of the country. And we will fight with the nation and the population to move to a higher level of political engagement, okay, that is more compatible with the objective challenges that the country is faced with, so that we at the end of the day, we get the best from our resources, and we will be passing on to the next generation of Guyanese a better country, a united country, and a country with a sense of a future.
Brother Tacuma Ogunseye of the Working People's Alliance, co-leader of the Working People's Alliance. Brother Tacuma, Kidackie and myself, who are on these platforms every day of the week, we are often bombarded with the issue of the coalition. Supporters of our party, supporters of the opposition, and even some of those who are not supporters of the opposition are asking the question about coalition. I sometimes have to hide from people who are either asking what is going on with the coalition. Are we going to go to the elections as a coalition? Or people are asking me, please speak to the two other leaders and let them know that time is running out. Our supporters seem to feel that we are not ready for the election because they're seeing no sign of a movement to coalition. What is the WPA's position on that, Tacuma?
The WPA position is clear. We are committed to coalition politics because we're convinced that the surest way of defeating the PPP at present is through a broad-based coalition. And we are committed to that, okay? And we are prepared for those coalition talks. We have been addressing these matters, as you point out this morning, for over 4 years. And we have took some decisions, some related to the party and some related to the country. And one of the issues is that the WPA preference is to enter the elections as a coalition. We are forced to enter the elections as an individual party in order to keep and to promote our electoral standing. We may be reluctantly be forced to go in that direction, but our preference is for coalition politics. Soon after the program, the press conference, somebody called me and asked the question about how the WPA will be able to guarantee that what happened in the last coalition don't repeat itself in a new coalition. Now, and I know this is an issue particularly for WPA supporters and WPA members and persons who have a keen political interest and pay a keen observation to the way the political process unfolded since the APMU AFC came to power. I have listened to the AFC's analysis of their experience in the coalition. And while they concede that there have been issues in the coalition of great concern for them, their general consensus, as reflected by Ramjatan, is that the coalition worked for them and they don't have the degree of concern about what happened in the coalition in terms of the PNC want to dominate, to the extent that a lot of AFC supporters and a lot of people, may feel, because they felt that with their 40%, they were given enough space in the coalition to function and to represent whatever interests they wanted. And I think we have to respect that view. But the WPA was in a different position because we were part of the APNU, and therefore we were subject to the direct control of the big party, the PNC. And the PNC didn't weren't careful to treat the APMU partners with a level of political respect, and they didn't demonstrate the kind of political maturity that requires from a party that only came to power because other small parties decide to work with them to bring them to power. They quickly resorted to big party politics. My own view as a person who participated in the negotiations for the APMU AFC coalition, I felt that once the PNC had to swallow the fact that they had to concede 40% of the power to the AFC, it led to panic in the PNC, and the APMU partners, the smaller parties, pay the price. And you couldn't find no person in the PNC faced with what we were faced with as smaller parties. You couldn't find one PNC leader who were prepared to stand up and to say the treatment of the smaller parties in the APMU is not in the best interest of the coalition. And I think that is very unfortunate. And I think in a big way, it had to do with Granger's style of leadership on politics and the fact that the PNC haven't conceded 40% of the power to the AFC, something which, when they entered the negotiations, they probably weren't prepared for, and they decided that they have to hold on to as much as they could hold on, and that the APMU partners will have to pay the price. And I think that in a big way, but quickly to answer the question that the person posed. Now, the WPA don't feel, you see, normally in coalition politics, what keeps parties in line is the threat that coalition partners could bring down the government. That is, apart from political culture, and so forth and so forth, in coalition politics, what keeps coalition together is the fact that in coalition situations, coalition partners, if they walk away from the government, will bring the government down. Now, we in the WPA was very conscious, particularly given our own history with the PNC, Burnham Rodney issues and so forth, that the WPA was very clear. We're not going to walk the road. We were very clear. But having decided not to walk the road or to threaten to walk the road, you leave with little control over what the big party decide to do. And in our judgment is that the situation going forward has to depend on a realization within the PNC leadership that they have made mistakes in the past. And this is why on a previous program I said that we're looking to see how they will, how they will assess what took place in the coalition, because that's important. But equally important is the PNC and opposition supporters. The opposition supporters have to be politically conscious that they have to be like the protector, of the coalition. And they have to be prepared to engage in the political process once problems begin to occur. And they have to move away from this doctrine that you can't wash your dirty linens in public. If the public supporters don't know the challenges that we're having in the coalition, then you're not in a position to help the coalition to solve anything. So we have to find a balance. And we are not reckless political people, but we're saying that the WPA can't guarantee anybody that a new coalition would behave different, okay, than the previous coalition. We will do our best to try to make sure that happens. But we are hoping that the experience and the trauma that opposition supporters and the support base went through with what happened in the last coalition, we're banking on that, and we're hoping to educate people, okay, on the role, not only to vote for us, but you have a right to ensure that each party in the coalition act properly, and you're prepared to politically sanction them. That is the only guarantee we see in the short run on this question.
The only way in the short run. I too got a couple of calls this morning from longtime WPA supporters and also people who are not very close to the party, asking one of the questions that was asked of me, and part of it was asked by one of the reporters at the press conference, whether we have seen any sign that the big party is prepared this time around to act differently. I could not give a definitive answer because, of course, one can only speculate at this point. The proof of the pudding is, of course, in the eating. Brother Tacuma Ogunseye, thank you very much for coming on to this evening's edition of Politics 101, WPA Groundings. You, along with Kidackie Amsterdam, I see Kidackie's here. He disappeared for a moment because I had a question for him. Kidackie, in your closing comments, you're a younger member. You weren't as closely associated with the experience at the leadership level with the last coalition and the APNU. From where you are and what you're seeing, do you have a hint that there might be a change in attitude towards democratization of the coalition in the future? You're muted.
Let me say, Dr. Hinds, history is a great teacher. And, we have learned, I'm sure all the partners of the APNU AFC coalition, or APNU coalition in particular, have learned from the most recent experiences. And if indeed they have the best interests of the country at heart, then that should, as we say, education is supposed to change attitude. And so with that, I'm thinking that there has to be some willingness somewhere along the line to treat any new coalition differently and so behave in a more democratic manner. I rather suspect, especially that you see ever so often that you are in constant contact with Aubrey Norton, that Aubrey Norton will always reach out to you on particular issues and so on. I rather suspect that if Norton were to lead or bring the PNC into a coalition with the WPA and any other political party, the behavior may very well be different to that which was experienced under David Granger. But again, I always encourage people to keep in mind that we're dealing with human beings and they're unpredictable.
Yeah. And your observation is right. We in the WPA want to make clear, as we have said that publicly, that although we are not in parliament, although we are not formally part of the APNU, on matters of national importance, the leader of the opposition, he does reach out to us. Of course, the party has appointed me as the point man to deal with the PNC, and he would reach out to me and ask our opinion on matters of national importance. In a sense, consulting with us, even though formally we are not in parliament, formally we are not in the APNU. And that is, I would say, a small sign of goodwill. But as both you and Tacuma have said, that has to mature, and we don't know where it will go in the future. We can only be hopeful. Tacuma Ogunseye, Kidackie Amsterdam, WPA co-leader and WPA organizing secretary. Thank you all so much for coming on tonight, and I will see you all next week.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, viewers, for spending your time and permitting me in your space.
Thank you,
Have a good
Brother David, and your viewers.
And thank you all for staying with us another night. As we say, walk one more mile with us. There's the old song, "Old lady, walk a mile and a half." If old lady can walk a mile and a half, then you can walk one more mile with us as we move forward in this journey. The road will be rocky. The road will be rocky because we are not sure yet about what this election will look like. But as WPA said, that one thing we are certain, if GCOM does not fix those burning issues of the voters list, biometrics, that even if we were to be forced, and I hope we are not forced, but even if we were to be forced to go into an election without a viable voters list and without biometrics and other guarantees of free and fair election, we cannot guarantee that after the elections, that the country will remain at a silent place. We cannot guarantee that. And so, as we always say, prevention is better than cure. We want a brand new voters list. We want biometrics. We want every single guarantee possible that the elections would be free and fair. We have to play our role in the leadership of the opposition parties. You, as Brother Ogunseye say, you have to play your role as citizens. And as the WPA said this morning, the international community has to hold this government accountable because they are partly responsible for this government being installed in office. And so they must play their role without interference in our affairs. We in the WPA do not want to be part of an installed regime. But we insist the international community must play its role. Tomorrow is election in America. Those of you who have not voted yet, please go out and vote. Even if you belong to New York, where the Democrats are expected to win big, your vote will still be counted. We want Kamala to win, but we want her to beat Mr. Trump by millions and millions of votes. Biden whipped him by 7 million votes. And we saw the way he behaved. This time, he must be whipped by 2 times 7,000 votes. So the popular vote matters. If you're in New York, do not stay home tomorrow. Go out and vote. Vote for Kamala Harris. Because America and what happens in that country is crucial to what happens in the rest of the world. It may be the lesser of the evils, but please go out and vote like a boss. Vote for the Harris-Walz ticket. See you all tomorrow. GHK Lal is going to be here. The struggle goes on. The struggle goes on.